The wind that ripped through the suburbs of Chicago was not just cold, it was a physical, malicious thing. It clawed at the thin coat Elena Brooks wore, sinking its teeth deep into her bones as if to punish her for being outside. She held her 4-year-old daughter's hand, a small, mitten-covered anchor in a world that was rapidly turning to ice. Sophie stumbled beside her, her breath a tiny white puff against the relentless gray of the morning. They were on foot because their car, a 1998 sedan that was more rust than metal, had finally given its last shuddering gasp 3 blocks back. Its engine had died with a pathetic wheeze, abandoning them to the elements. Elena's purse, slung over her shoulder, felt heavy with failure. Inside, she had a handful of change, $3.48 to be precise, not enough for a bus ticket out of the city, barely enough for a cup of coffee. It was not supposed to be this way. She was Elena Brooks, RN, a damn good pediatric nurse. Respected and skilled, she had spent 10 years healing children. Then she had done the right thing. She had seen the falsified data at the hospital, seen how Veridan Health was pushing a drug trial that was hurting patients, not helping them. She reported it. The hospital board called it a difference of opinion. She called it fraud. They called her disgruntled. 2 days after she blew the whistle, she was fired for gross misconduct. A week after that, her apartment was tossed, not like a robbery, but like a professional search. The threats followed, quiet and terrifying. She had grabbed Sophie, her emergency cash, and ran. Now, weeks later, the cash was gone, the car was dead, and she was a fugitive from a corporation with limitless power. Her eyes scanned the bleak street and landed on a sign, Frankie's Grill. The neon orange grill flickered violently, threatening to go dark. The windows were opaque with steam, promising a heat she craved more than food. It was a dive, the kind of place you ended up, not the kind you chose. "Just for a minute, baby," she whispered, her voice rough, "just to get warm." She pushed the heavy glass door open, a small bell tinkling overhead, and a wave of hot, greasy air hit them. The place was dark, smelled of stale beer and burnt coffee, and hummed with the low murmur of men's voices. It was filled with laborers in paint-splattered overalls and teamsters nursing hangovers. And in the back booths, there were other men in dark suits that cost more than her dead car, their faces hard, their eyes sharp. This was their territory. Elena immediately regretted her choice, but the cold at her back was worse. She guided Sophie to a small, wobbly, 2-top table near the drafty door, trying to make themselves invisible. She sat Sophie down, rubbing the child's frozen hands between her own. "Mommy, I'm hungry," Sophie whispered, her big brown eyes wide with a simple, painful truth. "I know, sweetie, I know." Elena's throat tightened. She was calculating if she could buy Sophie a piece of toast without attracting attention. That was when Sophie saw him. In the booth directly across from them sat a man, alone. He was a stark contrast to the rough-edged patrons. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit over a crisp white shirt, no tie. His dark hair was cut short, severe. His face was all hard angles and shadows, a face that looked like it had never known a moment of softness, but it was his eyes that held the room. They were a flat, penetrating gray, as cold and sharp as shards of glass. He was the kind of man her cop father had warned her about, a man who radiated absolute control, a stillness that was more menacing than any threat. In front of him sat a large, steaming plate of spaghetti and meatballs. The red sauce was vibrant, the meatballs the size of fists. Sophie, whose stomach was aching with emptiness, just stared. It was not a subtle glance. It was the fixed, desperate, all-consuming gaze of a child who was starving. Color flooded Elena's cheeks. "Sophie, no," she hissed, trying to turn her daughter's head. "Honey, it's rude to stare." But the little girl was transfixed. The man's hand, which had been lifting a fork, paused. He did not look up immediately. He slowly, deliberately, placed the fork back on his plate. Then he raised his head. His cold gray eyes bypassed Sophie and locked directly onto Elena. There was no pity in his gaze, no kindness. It was an assessment. He saw her worn-out coat, the fear in her posture, and the shame burning on her face. He saw her desperation, and he saw her daughter staring at his food. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. This was not just a mobster. This was power. She felt it radiating from him, a palpable, dangerous aura that sucked the air from her lungs. She had not escaped Veridin health just to walk into a different kind of predator's den. She did not know his name was Raphael Moretti. She did not know he was the capo of the Moretti Circle, the organization that quietly held Chicago's veins in an iron grip. She only knew he was the most dangerous thing she had ever seen. "We're leaving," she said abruptly, her voice tight with panic. She grabbed Sophie's arm and pulled her from the chair. "Now, Sophie, we're going." "But Mommy?" "Now?" She scrambled for the door, fumbling with her purse, pulling her daughter behind her. She tried to leave quietly, to slide back out into the cold unnoticed, as if she had never been there. She was halfway to the door when a low voice cut through the diner's hum. It was not loud, but it stopped everyone. "Wait." Elena froze, her back to him. She closed her eyes, praying he was talking to someone else. "Turn around," the voice commanded. Slowly, she turned. Raphael Moretti was watching her, his expression unreadable, his gray eyes piercing. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible flick of his head, summoning the waitress, a weary woman named Flo. Flo hurried over, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes downcast. "Yes, Mr. Moretti." Raphael did not take his eyes off Elena. He spoke to Flo, but his words were meant for the woman frozen by the door. "Feed them," he ordered, "and do not charge them." Flo nodded quickly. "Right away, Mr. Moretti." Raphael's gaze held Elena's. It was a collision of two worlds, the hunted and the hunter. In that single accidental moment, as Elena stood trapped between the freezing street and the impossible heat of his stare, a thread was pulled. The air was thick with the silent, heavy weight of a destiny that had just begun. Raphael Moretti did not move from his booth. He watched as the waitress, Flo, approached the woman and her child, speaking in a low, soothing tone. The woman, Elena, shook her head, her body rigid with a pride that was clearly costing her everything. She was trying to refuse the charity, but the little girl, Sophie, looked up at the waitress, her gaze so full of desperate, uncomplicated hope that Elena's resistance visibly fractured. She allowed Flo to guide them back to the small, wobbly table near the door. He watched them. He watched the waitress set down a short stack of pancakes, a small tin pitcher of syrup, and a cup of milk for the child, for the woman. Just a thick white mug of black coffee and a plate of dry toast. The child began to eat with a focus that was painful to witness, her small hands clutching the fork. The woman, however, did not move. She stared into the black coffee as if it held the answers to a future she could not bear to face. Her hands were wrapped around the mug, stealing its warmth, but she did not drink. Raphael found his eyes drawn to her, to the fine, sharp line of her jaw, the exhaustion carved into the skin around her eyes, and the defiant set of her mouth. She reminded him of Isabella. It was a strange, unwelcome thought, a ghost slipping into the seat across from him. His late wife, Isabella, had been soft and full of light, nothing like this sharp, starving creature. But in the end, after the betrayal, Isabella had worn this same look, the look of a woman cornered, hunted not by strangers, but by the very world that was supposed to protect her. It was the look of profound, agonizing disillusionment. It was a look Raphael had sworn he would never see again. He pushed the ghost of his wife away, finished his own meal, and stood. The diner, which had resumed its low hum, quieted as he rose. Power was its own language, and Raphael spoke it fluently. He walked to their table. Elena flinched, her hand instinctively moving to cover Sophie's shoulder, a lioness shielding her cub, even though she had no claws left. He ignored her fear. He pulled his wallet from the inside of his suit jacket, a simple, elegant piece of black leather. He dropped several bills onto the table, too, maybe $300. The money fanned out near her untouched toast. "This covers your meal," he said, his voice a low rumble, "and the one I ate, and the rent on this place for the day." Elena's head snapped up, her brown eyes flashing with anger and humiliation. "We don't want your—" "I do not care what you want," he interrupted, his voice cutting, devoid of kindness. He looked at the child, who had paused, pancake halfway to her mouth. "There is no debt. Let the girl eat." She was forced to meet his gaze then. It was a collision. Her eyes were a storm of terror, fury, and desperate pride. His were the cold, flat gray of a winter ocean, empty of sentiment but charged with an intensity that pinned her to the seat. He was assessing her, cataloging her, and she felt stripped bare, as if he could see every mistake that had led her to this specific, miserable moment. She was the first to look away, breaking the contact, defeated. Raphael turned without another word and walked out. Elena watched through the window as he slid into the back of an immaculate, armored black sedan. It pulled silently into traffic and vanished. She did not touch the money, but she made Sophie finish every bite of the pancakes. Then, grabbing her daughter's hand, she fled the diner, leaving the cash on the table as if it were poison. In the back of the sedan, Raphael was on the phone. "Angelo," he said. "A woman and a child just left Frankie's. Brown hair, thin coat, maybe 5'5". The child is small, maybe 4. I want eyes on them. Find out who she is." "A problem, boss?" "I am not sure," Raphael said, looking out the window, though he could no longer see her. She looked hunted. "Find out who the hunter is." Darkness fell like a shroud, and the temperature plummeted. Elena had walked for hours, finding her way to the industrial park where she had rented a 10x10 storage unit under a false name. It was their only refuge. Her dead car was miles away. She was fumbling with the cheap padlock, her fingers numb, Sophie crying softly from the cold, when a dark panel van slid up the access road, its headlights off. It blocked the only exit. 2 men stepped out. They were not street thugs. They were clean, muscular, and moved with purpose. They wore dark utility pants and jackets. Corporate muscle. "Elena Brooks," one of them said. It was not a question. "You've been very difficult to find. Veritan Health would like their property back." Elena's blood turned to ice. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The data files. Miss Brooks, give them to us and we'll let the girl go." She scrambled behind her, pushing Sophie behind her own body. "Stay away from us." The man sighed and pulled a heavy, weighted sap from his jacket. "We were authorized to be persuasive." He lunged. Elena screamed. At that exact moment, the black sedan Raphael had been in rocketed down the access road, its high beams flashing on, illuminating the scene in a harsh, blinding glare. It did not slow down. It slammed into the side of the van, the sound of impact a deafening shriek of tortured metal. Before the sedan had even stopped moving, Raphael Moretti was out of the passenger door. He moved with a speed that was terrifying, inhuman. The first man turned, surprised, and met Raphael's fist. It was not a punch. It was a calibrated strike to the throat. The man collapsed, gagging. The second man, the one with the sap, swung at Raphael. Raphael caught his wrist, twisted it, and the sound of the bone snapping was louder than the man's cry. Raphael did not stop. He drove his elbow into the man's solar plexus, and as he doubled over, brought a knee up into his face. It was over in less than 10 seconds. Just brutal, efficient, and silent violence. Raphael stood breathing hard, his suit immaculate save for the dust. His surveillance team's car pulled up, men spilling out to handle the 2 downed Veritan men. Elena was shaking so hard she could barely stand, holding Sophie in a death grip. Raphael turned to her, his face a mask in the shadows. "Get in the car." Who are you?" she stammered. "The man who just saved your life. Get in the car. Now. They will send more." Sophie, who had been burying her face in Elena's coat, peeked out. She was not crying. She was staring at Raphael with wide, awestruck eyes. She pointed a small, mitten-covered finger. "Mommy, he's bleeding!" Elena's gaze snapped to where Sophie was pointing. A dark stain was spreading rapidly on the sleeve and side of Raphael's white shirt, just below his ribs. In the fight, the second man must have had a knife. "The hero is bleeding," Sophie whispered. The word hero cut through Elena's panic. The nurse took over. "You're hit." Raphael glanced down, annoyed. "It is nothing. The car—" "We can't," Elena said, her voice shaking but finding a new, old strength. "I can't go with you. I don't know you, but I cannot let you bleed out." She looked around desperately. My place. It's here. I have a first aid kit. It's clean." He stared at her. This woman who was offering to patch up the very monster she was terrified of. He saw the integrity in her eyes, the same integrity that had gotten her into this mess. He gave a short, sharp nod. She led him into the freezing, metal-walled storage unit. It was lit by a single, battery-powered lantern. In the corner was a bare mattress and a few sealed boxes. Elena laid a sleeping Sophie on the mattress, covering her with their only coats. "Take off your jacket and your shirt," she commanded, her voice the clipped, professional tone of an ER nurse. He did, revealing a long, deep gash along his side. It was bleeding heavily. She knelt before him, opening her medical kit. Her hands were shaking, but her touch was steady as she began to clean the wound. Her proximity to him electric and terrifying. He did not hiss, did not react to the sting of the antiseptic. He just watched her, his gray eyes unblinking in the cold lantern light. She was saving him. He had saved her. In the silence of the cold, metal box, a dangerous, fragile link was forged between the light and the shadow. He sat on a hard plastic storage tote, the only thing in the 10x10 unit strong enough to hold his weight. The battery-powered lantern on the floor cast a sickly, weak, yellow glow, carving sharp shadows across the planes of his face and the hard muscles of his chest. His jacket and the remnants of his shirt lay in a dark pile near his feet. The air was frigid. Elena could see her own breath as she worked, her fingers clumsy not just from the cold, but from a profound, vibrating fear. He was absolutely still. She had threaded a sterile suture needle from her kit. She was kneeling on the concrete floor in front of him, her world reduced to the pale, taut skin, the dark, oozing gash, and the heat radiating from his body. It was a clean cut, but deep. The knife had glanced off a rib, an inch in another direction, and he would be bleeding out internally. Her hands trembled as she pushed the needle through his skin for the first stitch. He did not flinch. He did not suck in a breath. His muscles did not even tense. He just watched her, his gray eyes metallic in the dim light. She was terrified. It was the terror of proximity. She was touching a man whose power was so absolute, so lethal, that he had dismantled 2 trained men in seconds. She had seen the casual, brutal efficiency. She could smell the iron of his blood, a scent that mixed with the faint, expensive cologne clinging to his skin. It was an impossibly intimate, dangerous combination. She was half aware of the child breathing softly on the mattress behind them, and that awareness was the only thing keeping her focused. She pulled the stitch tight, her movements becoming more mechanical, the nurse overriding the woman. He broke the silence. His voice was a low rasp that seemed to soak up the small, cold air. "Do you always risk yourself for strangers?" Her hands paused for a fraction of a second over the wound. She did not look up. She could not meet those eyes. She focused on the next stitch, pushing the needle through with practiced precision. "I used to save people for 10 years, she answered, her own voice tight and thin. "It was my job." She knotted the thread, her hands moving with a desperate, familiar rhythm. "Now, I just want to save myself." She reached for the gauze, expecting him to be silent, to dismiss her. Instead, she heard a low sound, almost an exhale. She dared to look up. A smile was playing on his lips. It was not a kind smile, it was not warm. It was a sharp, magnetic flash of light in the darkness of his face, a private acknowledgement that held no comfort at all. It was rare, and it was devastating. It vanished as quickly as it came, but the image of it was burned into her mind, that one. Brief expression held more power than the violence she had witnessed. He looked away from her, his gaze falling on the small, sleeping form of her daughter, bundled in the coats. Sophie was completely oblivious, lost in the innocence of sleep. Elena finished her work. She taped the thick white bandage pad firmly against his side, her fingers brushing the hard ridges of his abdomen. The contact was electric, and she pulled her hands back as if burned. She sat back on her heels, the task complete, the space between them, no longer filled by the medical necessity, became charged and suffocating. They sat in the near darkness, the only sounds the faint whistle of the wind outside the metal door and Sophie's quiet breaths. It was not trust that settled between them. It was something far stranger, a bleak and unspoken empathy. They were two opposing forces, a healer who had been cast out for doing good, he, a killer who ruled an empire of shadows, and yet, in that moment, they were the same. Both were hunted. Both understood what it meant to live with a target on their back. He rose to his feet in one fluid motion, as if the gash in his side was nothing more than an inconvenience. He picked up his ruined shirt, then discarded it, pulling on only his suit jacket, the fine wool strained over his bare, bandaged torso, a bizarre mix of savagery and civilization. "You should not be here," he said quietly, his voice flat. "It is all I have," she whispered, rising to her feet, suddenly aware of how small the space was. "This," he motioned to the metal walls, "is a grave. Veriton is not a company. It is a syndicate. They are not the kind you can fight, not with data and lawyers." He looked at her, his eyes holding hers again. "They are the kind you must destroy." Elena felt a cold dread settle in her stomach, deeper than the Chicago chill. "I cannot." "I know." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, the one that was not soaked in blood. He produced a single card. It was not paper. It was a piece of thick, heavy black metal, cold to the touch. In the center, embossed in a dull, gunmetal gray, was a single, intricate symbol, a circle, formed by a serpent eating its own tail. He held it out to her. She stared at it, not moving. "What is it?" "An entrance," he said. "The world you are in is going to kill you. This is the door to mine." She did not want to take it. Taking it was a concession, an admission that the world she believed in of rules, of right and wrong, of justice was gone. Taking it was a surrender. "I'm not like you," she said, her voice a fragile protest. His rare smile returned, this time just a shadow, a cruel twist of his lips. "You are running. You are hiding in the dark. You are more like me than you know." He pushed the card into her hand, her fingers closed around the cold metal, the weight of it a terrible, solid reality. He moved to the corrugated metal door of the unit. He paused, his hand on the latch, his back to her. "My men cleared the area," he said, his voice hard again. "All business. They are gone, but Veriton will be back. They will find this place by morning." He slid the latch open and lifted the heavy door just enough to slip under. For a second he was a silhouette against the dark, polluted glow of the city night. Then he was gone. The door rolled shut with a heavy, final sound that echoed in the tiny space. Elena stood alone in the silence, the cold rushing back in. Her hand unclenched, she stared at the black metal card. She felt no relief that he was gone. There was only the bone-deep cold, the absolute certainty of her impending doom, and beneath it all, a terrifying, undeniable pull toward the darkness that had just saved her life. Raphael Moretti's investigation into Veriton Health was swift and brutal. He did not use lawyers or private investigators. He used men who knew how to make other men talk. Within 48 hours, the truth was on his desk. Veriton was a massive front, a corporate entity that laundered millions for the Carboni Syndicate, his family's oldest and most bitter rival. This woman, Elena Brooks, had not just stumbled onto corporate fraud, she had unknowingly kicked a hornet's nest of organized crime. She was a loose end the Carbonis could not afford, and they were infinitely more dangerous than Veridan's corporate muscle. He found her location in under a day. Elena had not used the metal card, not directly. She had sold the expensive jewelry she'd fled with, managing to secure a fake ID and a single room in a tenement building. She found a job at a small, cash-only community clinic in a rough neighborhood, working nights under the name Anna Costa. It was exhausting, anonymous work, and it was the only thing keeping her and Sophie fed. She was emptying a biohazard bin late one Tuesday, the sound of freezing rain lashing against the clinic's thin windows. When the back door opened, she spun around, her hand flying to the small canister of pepper spray in her pocket. It was him, Raphael Moretti. He looked untouched by the storm, his black wool coat perfectly dry, his hair immaculate. He did not look like he had been stabbed 3 weeks prior. He looked like the predator she remembered from the diner. "Elena," he said. His voice was not a greeting. It was a summons. "How did you find me?" she whispered, her blood running cold. "Your methods of hiding are predictable," he said, dismissing her efforts. "Get your child. We are leaving." "I'm not going anywhere with you." His gray eyes hardened, losing any trace of the strange empathy they had shared in the storage unit. "This is not a request. The men who want you dead are not from Veritan. They are the Carboni family. And my sources tell me they found this clinic 10 minutes ago. You have, perhaps, 3 minutes before they arrive." Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. He was already moving past her, toward the small break room where Sophie was sleeping on a cot. "Get your coat," he commanded. He scooped the sleeping child up in one arm. Sophie stirred, murmured, and then, recognizing the man from the storage unit, the hero, she settled her head against his shoulder and went back to sleep. The sight of her small, innocent daughter resting so comfortably in the arms of a killer tore Elena's world apart. "Now," he said. He pushed her out the back door and into the alley, just as a black SUV without license plates turned onto the street at the end of the block. They did not run to his sedan. They ran to a nondescript gray pickup truck, idling at the curb. Raphael's driver, Angelo, was at the wheel. Raphael opened the back door, put Sophie gently onto the seat, and then almost threw Elena in after her. He climbed into the passenger seat. "Go," he ordered Angelo. The truck shot into traffic, its tires screaming on the wet pavement. Elena, her heart hammering, looked out the back window. The black SUV had seen them. It accelerated, its engine roaring. "They are on us," she yelled. "I am aware," Raphael said, his voice dangerously calm. He did not even look back. "Angelo, the bridge." The chase was a blur of rain, red taillights, and terror. Angelo drove with a cold precision, weaving through traffic, taking corners at impossible speeds. The SUV behind them was a battering ram, relentless, slamming into their bumper. The truck fishtailed, and Elena screamed, shielding Sophie with her body. "They're trying to push us off the road," she cried. "Yes," Raphael said. Another black SUV, identical to the first, appeared from a side street, cutting them off. They were trapped. "Boss," Angelo said, his knuckles white on the wheel. "Now, Angelo, hit it." Angelo stomped on the accelerator, but he was not aiming for the gap between the two cars. He was aiming directly for the concrete divider of the overpass. Elena screamed, thinking he was killing them all. At the last second, Angelo cranked the wheel. The truck spun in a perfect 180, the move so violent it threw Elena against the door. The two Carboni vehicles, unable to react, tried to brake. The first one slammed into the second. The second, its tires locking on the slick road, skidded, smashed through the guardrail, and plummeted over the side of the bridge. It landed on a set of railroad tracks below, erupting in a massive, blinding ball of fire that lit the night sky. The truck was already speeding away in the opposite direction. Elena was hyperventilating, clutching a now wailing Sophie. She was soaked in cold sweat and shaking so hard she could not speak. They drove for 20 minutes in silence, finally pulling into a private subterranean garage beneath a high-rise of black glass. Raphael led them to an elevator, which opened directly into a penthouse that was less a home and more a fortress of steel and glass. The windows were 2 stories high, showcasing the entire storm-drenched city of Chicago. He showed her a bedroom for Sophie and one for her. "You will be safe here. No one knows this place exists." He left her. The next day, he was gone. But his men were posted outside the elevator. Elena and Sophie were prisoners in a gilded cage. On the 3rd day, Sophie, bored and restless, found Raphael in the vast, empty living room, staring out the window. She walked up to him, her small steps hesitant. "Hi," she whispered. He looked down, his expression unreadable. "Mommy calls you that man." Sophie said, "But you are the hero. Are you sad?" Raphael knelt, an awkward, stiff motion, bringing himself down to her level. "I'm not sad," he said. "My mommy is sad," Sophie offered. "Can you make a toy?" He stared at her, then, slowly, he reached for a piece of paper from the printer on a nearby desk. He sat on the cold marble floor, and in the middle of the empty, sterile room, he began to fold his large, scarred hands that had ended lives, moved with a strange, precise delicacy. He made a perfect paper airplane. He showed her how to fold her own. Elena watched from the hallway, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. It was the single most human thing she had ever witnessed. That image of the Mafia Boss and her daughter folding paper planes was more dangerous to her heart than any bullet. Sophie laughed, a real, happy laugh, and called him Uncle Rafe. Later that night, long after Sophie was asleep, Elena found him in the kitchen. He was standing by the window, the city lights reflecting in his gray eyes. She had to do something, anything to feel normal. She had decided to cook, finding pasta and a simple jar of sauce in the pristine, unused pantry. The pot of water was boiling. She was looking for a strainer, opening and closing empty cabinets, her frustration mounting. He moved, his presence so quiet she did not realize he was beside her until she felt the heat of his body. He was too close, his shoulder almost brushing hers in the confined space. He reached past her, his arm brushing her waist, and opened a drawer she had missed. He pulled out a strainer. "Here," he said. His hand touched hers as he passed it. It was a simple, accidental contact, but it felt like a brand. She froze. The strainer held between them. The entire world seemed to contract to the sound of the boiling water and the rain against the glass. She looked up, forced to meet his gaze. His eyes were not cold. They were dark, intense, and fixed on her mouth. He was not the boss. He was not the killer. He was just a man. And she saw a flicker of something deep and broken in his stare. He leaned in. It was barely a movement, just a fractional closing of the distance. She did not breathe, did not pull away. He stopped, his jaw tightening. He took a sharp step back, the spell shattering. The air rushed back in, cold and harsh. "I cannot let you step into my darkness," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper. Elena's own voice was shaking, but she did not look away. She clutched the strainer to her chest. "I am already in the darkness," she replied, her words barely audible but true. "You are the only light." Her words, "You are the only light," hung in the sterile air of the penthouse kitchen long after she had uttered them. They were a confession more intimate, more dangerous than any touch. Raphael did not move for a long time. He looked at this woman, this nurse who had tried to do the right thing and had her life shattered for it. She was looking at him, a man who had built an empire on doing the wrong things, as if he were a savior. The irony was so bitter it almost choked him. He turned from her, breaking the fragile, supercharged moment. "Clean this up," he ordered, his voice once again the cold, flat instrument of his will. "We leave in 1 hour." Elena flinched, the warmth draining from her face, leaving her pale and confused. Leave where you said we were safe here." "You are safe from the Carboni," he said, walking into the living room, the city lights painting him in cold neon. "You are not safe from me." She followed him, her hands clenched. "What does that mean?" He turned, his gray eyes boring into her. "It means you look at me and you see a hero. You see light. I am the man who has his enemies dissolved in acid. I am the man who took this city by breaking the backs of his rivals. I am the darkness, Elena. The only light I possess is the fire I use to burn my world down." He had to make her see. He had to break this illusion before it broke both of them. "You reminded me of her," he said, his voice dropping so low she had to strain to hear it. "In the diner. That pride, that defiance. It was just like Isabella." "Your wife," Elena whispered, remembering the surveillance photos she had seen in the news archives when she had researched him. A beautiful, laughing woman. "She was killed," Raphael stated, the words like chips of ice. "Not by a rival, by my own blood. My cousin, Paolo, wanted my chair. He staged a car bomb meant for me. But Isabella, she took the car that day to get pastries." He looked out the window, but he was seeing a memory. She was not part of this world. She was good. And this world devoured her. "So I tore it apart. I hunted Paolo down, and I took everything. I became the capo to protect what was left. I built this armor." He motioned to the glass fortress, "so that no one could ever touch me again." Elena watched him, seeing the profound, aching wound beneath the armor. He was not a monster by choice, but by tragedy. She stepped closer. "I'm sorry, Raphael, I truly am, but you are wrong about me." He looked at her, questioning. "I did not just report numbers," she said, her voice shaking with her own ghosts. "I was a pediatric nurse. I held children while they died, and I watched as Veridin's new protocol, their miracle drug, made them die faster. I saw a 9-year-old girl, Anna, go into liver failure. Her parents held her hand, and I knew it was the drug. I stole the original data. I was going to be their star witness, but they buried the case, fired me, and sent those men." She was crying now, silent tears of rage. "They are hunting me because I know they murdered children for a stock price. We are not so different. We are both just survivors of the people we were supposed to trust." Their shared pain crossed the room, a tangible, invisible bridge connecting their two broken worlds. He stared at her, the cold mask of the capo cracking, revealing the man beneath. "Chicago is compromised," he said, his voice rough. "The Carbones are rats in the walls. We cannot stay." He moved them under the cover of darkness, a private jet, a silent drive through wooded, winding roads. He took them to a house hidden on the shore of a vast, dark lake in the New Jersey wilderness. It was a modern structure of warm cedar and glass, the complete opposite of the cold Chicago penthouse. It was a sanctuary, built by his father, a place the world had forgotten. For 3 weeks, they lived in a strange, suspended peace. Raphael's men were invisible, ghosts in the surrounding woods, but they were there. Inside the house, there was quiet. Elena watched Sophie flourish, chasing butterflies near the water, her laughter echoing in the clean air. And Raphael. He watched Elena. He would sit in the study, the door open, observing her read to Sophie on the sofa, her voice soft and soothing. He watched her cook in the kitchen, her movements efficient and graceful. He felt a stillness settle in his chest, a quiet he had not known since before Isabella's death. He realized the peace was not in the location. It was her. One night, a storm rolled in, the same way it had in Chicago, but here it felt wild, elemental. Rain lashed the glass walls, and thunder cracked over the lake. Elena was standing by the window, watching the lightning fork across the black water. She was terrified of storms. She did not hear him approach. He simply appeared beside her, a solid presence in the dark. "It is just noise," he said. "It feels like the end of the world," she whispered, her hands clasped tightly. He stood beside her, watching the storm with her. He could smell the faint scent of soap from her skin. "Raphael," she said, her voice trembling, "I'm so afraid, not of the storm, of this, of feeling safe. I do not know how to live like this." He turned to face her. The room was dark, save for the blue-white flashes of the lightning outside. She looked fragile, beautiful, and so very, very real. He did not plan it. He did not think. He simply acted. He raised his hand, his scarred, calloused fingers tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was hesitant, almost questioning. She did not pull away. She closed her eyes, a small, shuddering breath escaping her as she leaned into his touch. It was a surrender. He lowered his head, and his lips met hers. It was not a kiss of passion or of lust. It was slow and desperately real. It was a kiss of shared pain, of profound loneliness. Her lips were soft, trembling beneath his. He was gentle, unhurried, as if learning a language he had long forgotten. It was two souls, pressed together, trying to find warmth in the cold. He pulled back, just enough to rest his forehead against hers. Their breaths mingled. He could feel the wetness of her tears on his hand. "I did not know how to love anymore," he whispered. His voice raw, broken, the confession was torn from him. "I thought that part of me was buried with Isabella." He opened his eyes, forcing her to see the truth in his. "Until I met you." A sob broke from her throat. She cried, not for happiness, but for the sheer, terrible tragedy of it. This was impossible. This man, this life, this moment, it could not last. Outside, a mile down the private access road, hidden in the dense, dripping woods, a pair of binoculars focused on the glass house. A man sat in a dark van, a satellite phone to his ear, his voice a low, satisfied murmur. "We found him. He's at the old Moretti Lake House. And Mr. Carboni, he's not alone." The kiss lingered in the air, a fragile moment of warmth shattered by the dawn. The storm over the lake had passed, leaving behind a sky of bruised purple and gray. Peace. It lasted for one deceptive second. Then the world exploded. The entire two-story glass wall overlooking the lake did not just break. It detonated inward in a shower of tempered cubes. The sound was a deafening roar, followed instantly by the sharp, automatic cracks of gunfire. Raphael had not moved. He was already in motion as the glass hung in the air. The tenderness was gone, vaporized. In its place was the capo, a creature of pure, cold instinct. "Elena?" His voice was a physical force. He grabbed her, shoving her away from the open space toward the solid inner wall. "Sophie?" Elena, paralyzed by the sudden shift from intimacy to war, scrambled for the bedroom. She snatched Sophie from the bed. The child, ripped from sleep, was groggy and confused. "The closet!" Raphael yelled, appearing in the doorway. He was already bleeding, a long graze of glass across his cheek. But he did not notice. "In my study, go." He pushed them down the hall as his own men. Ghosts in the house, materialized and returned fire. The house had become a shooting gallery, bullets ripping through the expensive, minimalist furniture. Elena found the study. Behind a false bookcase was a steel door, a panic room. She fumbled with the hidden latch. "Mommy, I'm scared." Sophie began to wail. "I know, baby, I know. We have to be quiet." Elena threw the door open and bundled Sophie inside, pulling the heavy door shut just as a spray of bullets stitched the wall where they had been standing. Inside, it was pitch black, sound-damped, and smelled of concrete and steel. Elena held Sophie, her own heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. She could only listen. The sounds were muffled but horrific, shouts in Italian, the heavy, controlled thump-thump-thump of Raphael's handgun, a different sound from the frantic, high-pitched rattling of the attackers' automatic weapons. She heard bodies falling, heavy, sickening thuds. She heard a man scream, cut short. She buried her face in Sophie's hair, praying to a god she had long since abandoned. The fighting moved. It went from the main hall to the lawn. The gunfire became slightly more distant. Elena, her curiosity a sickness, cracked the heavy steel door by a quarter-inch. She could see a sliver of the lawn, now bathed in the cold, gray light of dawn. It was littered with bodies, at least 5 of them, men in dark tactical gear. The house was destroyed, smoke pouring from the shattered windows. And she saw him. Raphael was on the wide dock that jutted out into the lake. He was not wearing a shirt, just his pants from the night before. His skin slick with blood from at least 3 different wounds. He was moving slowly, favoring his left side, a deep gash weeping crimson onto his hip. Facing him was a large man in an immaculate dark coat, Riccardo Carboni. He was holding a pistol, and he was smiling. "It is over, Moretti." Carboni's voice boomed across the water. "Your father's house, your grave, a poetic end. You got soft." Raphael raised his gun, but it clicked, empty. Carboni laughed and raised his own pistol, taking aim. "This is for my men, and for my business you ruined." Raphael did not wait for the shot. With a roar that was pure, animalistic rage, he lunged. Carboni fired. The bullet struck Raphael square in the shoulder, the impact spinning him. But he did not stop. His momentum carried him forward, his arms locking around Carboni's thick waist in a tackle. They crashed onto the wet wood of the dock. Elena screamed, her voice trapped in the panic room. Raphael, using the last of his strength, rolled them, pushing, driving. Carboni fired again, wild, the shot missing. They reached the edge of the dock, and with one final, desperate heave, Raphael Moretti dragged the head of the Carboni family with him into the black, icy depths of the lake. The splash was enormous, then silence. The water bubbled, then stilled. Neither man resurfaced. Elena stared, her mind blank. She did not know how long she stood there before the sound of new sirens. Closer this time, pierced her fog. Police. And behind them, news vans. They had arrived far too quickly. She stumbled out of the house, holding a crying Sophie. The lawn was a massacre. Police officers swarmed the property, their guns drawn. They did not look at her with concern. They looked at her with suspicion. "Put your hands up now." My daughter," Elena stammered. "Who are you? Where is Moretti?" an officer demanded, grabbing her arm, his grip bruising. He's in the lake," she whispered, numb. "He's gone." They handcuffed her. They put her in the back of a police car, ignoring her protests. As they drove her away, the local news cameras zoomed in, flashes popping. They captured the image of the mystery woman, her face streaked with tears and soot, being arrested. And they captured the sound of Sophie, her small face pressed against the police car window, screaming for the only person she believed could save them. "Uncle Rafe, I want Uncle Rafe. Where is the hero?" The story dominated the news for weeks. The lakefront massacre, the Mafia war, the mystery woman and the crying child. Elena was released after 3 days. There was no evidence to hold her. A lawyer she had never met, paid for by the Circle, secured her release on one condition: she was a material witness and could not leave the state. Raphael Moretti was declared missing, presumed dead. The lake was dragged for a week. They found Riccardo Carboni's body. They never found Raphael's. Elena vanished. She took a bus to a faceless suburb, found a cheap apartment and locked the door. She lived on what little cash she had, a ghost in a world that had tried to kill her. Every night, she dreamed. She did not dream of the kiss or the paper airplanes. She dreamed of his eyes, the absolute burning sacrifice in them as he lunged, wounded, at his enemy. The world believed he was dead. But 3 nights later, across the street from her new, run-down apartment, a man sat in a dark car. He watched her shadow pass the window. He lowered the binoculars, his face obscured by the darkness, only the faint outline of a new scar visible on his jaw. He was there, and he was watching. 6 months passed. Winter had thawed into a humid, oppressive summer, and Elena's life had settled into a grim routine of survival. She was Anna Costa again, working at a 24-hour diner in a different, anonymous New Jersey town. She took the graveyard shift from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, a ghost serving ghosts. Sophie was in a subsidized daycare. They lived in a third-floor walk-up in a building that smelled of stale curry and damp plaster. Elena was invisible. But she was not alone. At first, she thought the paranoia had returned. She would feel a gaze on her back as she walked Sophie to the bus stop. But when she turned, there was only a delivery truck or a man reading a paper. Then, things began to happen. A belligerent drunk at the diner, one who had tried to corner her by the restrooms, was found in the alley an hour later with both his kneecaps broken. The police called it a mugging. Her landlord, a slimy man who always let his eyes linger too long, had tried to raise her rent illegally. 2 days later, he met her in the hall, his face pale, his eyes wide with terror. He apologized, said there was a mistake, and that her rent would, in fact, be lowered. She began to listen to the news with a new, secret understanding. A high-level executive from Veritan Health, the last one connected to her case, had driven his car off a bridge. It was ruled a suicide. A known Carboni enforcer was found dead in a meatpacking plant, the victim of what was called industrial machinery failure. This was not random. It was a cleansing. It was a methodical, patient, and utterly ruthless dismantling of everyone who had ever touched her. She did not feel fear. She felt a strange, profound, and guilty warmth. It was the feeling of being protected by a force as absolute and unforgiving as nature itself. He was out there. The hero was not dead. He was just hunting. One hot, suffocating afternoon in August, she came home from picking up Sophie, her feet aching, her scrubs damp with sweat. A package was leaning against her apartment door. It was not a box. It was a large, simple bouquet of white roses, dozens of them wrapped in plain brown paper. They were impossibly fresh, their scent cutting through the building's stench. Her heart stopped. She knelt, her hands shaking so badly she could barely pick them up. Tucked into the blooms was a small, plain white card. She pulled it free. The handwriting was sharp, angular, and strong. It was not his, but the words were, "Because you still believe in goodness." Elena's legs gave out. She sank to the floor in the dim hallway, clutching the roses to her chest, and wept. She cried for the man who had dragged his enemy into a black lake, who had crawled out, scarred and broken, and had spent 6 months eliminating her demons from the shadows. She cried because he was alive, and because he remembered. The peace lasted for 2 days. The remnants of the Carboni family were desperate. With Riccardo dead and their assets frozen by Raphael's unseen war, they were cornered. They blamed the woman from the lake house for the collapse of their empire. They had found her. That night, Elena was woken by a scream, not from Sophie, from her neighbor. She bolted upright. The air in the room was hot, thick. She smelled gasoline. She ripped open her bedroom door. The hallway, her small living room, was an inferno. Flames were climbing the cheap wallpaper, devouring the door. "Sophie!" she screamed. She ran to her daughter's bed, scooped her up. Sophie was already coughing, her eyes wide with terror. "Mommy, the fire!" "I know, baby, I know." Elena ran to the window, the one that led to the ancient, rusty fire escape. She threw the window open. Black smoke billowed in. The fire was not just in her apartment, it was below it. They had been targeted. She climbed out onto the metal platform, her feet scorching on the hot rungs, Sophie clinging to her neck. She looked down. A man was standing at the bottom of the fire escape in the alley, looking up. He was thin, wearing a dark suit, and he was smiling. He raised a pistol. "You," he snarled. "The whore of Moretti! You cost us everything! You will burn for him!" He was Antonio Carboni, Riccardo's younger, more sadistic brother. "No!" Elena screamed, shielding Sophie with her body, trapped between the inferno and the gunman. A shot exploded in the confines of the alley, but it was not from Antonio's gun. It came from the darkness at the end of the alley. Antonio Carboni looked down, a small, dark hole appearing in the center of his chest. He looked up, his expression one of pure confusion, before he crumpled to the pavement. A figure stepped out of the shadows. He was not the man she remembered. This man was leaner, harder, his dark hair was longer, wild. A thick, unkempt beard covered the lower half of his face, but it could not hide the angry, puckered scar that ran from his left temple down across his cheek, disappearing into the beard. He was dressed in the simple black work pants and t-shirt of a ghost. He moved, not with the cold precision of the capo, but with a desperate, frantic energy. He ran to the fire escape and climbed, his hands and feet hitting the metal rungs 3 at a time. He reached her on the 3rd-floor landing, the world around them a roaring orange. The smoke was so thick she could barely see him, but she could feel the heat of him, a heat more intense than the flames. "Raphael," she breathed, the name of a prayer. He ripped his jacket off and wrapped it around Sophie, then pulled them both into an embrace so tight it bruised her ribs. He was real. He was breathing, his chest heaving, his body a solid, scarred reality. He lifted his head, and she met his eyes. They were the same, the cold, gray, devastating eyes of the man who had bought her child pancakes. "I am not him," he said, his voice a raw rasp, changed by the smoke or the lake. "I am Marco. This is not a mask." He touched the scar on his cheek. "This is what is left." Sirens were screaming, getting closer. The building groaned, a support giving way. He did not hesitate. He picked up Sophie, tucked her against his chest, grabbed Elena's arm, and hauled them down the fire escape. Past the body of Antonio Carboni, he pushed them into the street just as the roof of the apartment building caved in, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. They stood on the opposite curb, an island in the chaos, lit by the fire and the approaching red and blue lights. Elena was shaking, her hand reaching up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the rough line of the scar. "I knew it," she sobbed. "I knew you were not dead." He looked at the inferno, at the approaching police cars, and then down at her. The hunt was over. The last of them was dead in the alley. "This time I am not running," Raphael said, his voice raw. Elena grabbed the front of his torn, smoky shirt, her knuckles white, her eyes blazing. "And I am not letting you go." His men arrived in the chaos of the fire, materializing from the smoke and sirens like wraiths. Angelo, his face grim, hustled Elena and a sleeping Sophie into a black, nondescript van. Raphael, his face a mask of cold fury, got in the front. "Antonio Carboni is dead in the alley," Raphael said, his voice a low rasp. "The council will hear about it by morning." "Boss," Angelo said, his eyes on the rearview mirror, "you just announced your return." "I know." They did not go to a penthouse. They went to a concrete bunker, a windowless safe house buried beneath a defunct auto body shop. Sophie was given a mild sedative in a juice box, a precaution to let her sleep, and was tucked into a cot in the only small bedroom. The main room was gray concrete and fluorescent lights. Raphael stood in the center, the man who had been Marco the ghost, now fully resurrected as the capo. But he was a capo with a problem. "I have to face them," he said, more to himself than to Elena. "Face who?" Elena's voice was shaky. She was still covered in soot, her hands raw from the fire escape. "The consiglio," he said, "the council. The old men who ran their world, who enforced the code. I broke the rules. I started a war with a corporation. I operated as a ghost, killing their rivals without sanction. I let Riccardo Carboni die in the open, at the lake house, bringing the federal government down on all of them. And tonight, I killed his brother in a civilian street." He was pacing, the coiled, violent energy rolling off him. "They do not tolerate chaos. They will see me as a rogue element. But they were trying to kill me to kill Sophie." "It does not matter," he said, his voice flat. "They will summon me, and I must go." He left before dawn, and he was gone for 8 hours. When he returned, The iron control was back, but his gray eyes were dead, as if the scarred man had retreated, leaving only the calculating boss. Elena was waiting, her nerves shredded. What did they say? He walked to the small counter, pouring a glass of water he did not drink. They accused me of betrayal. His voice was devoid of emotion. They believe I used you as an excuse to wipe out the Carboni family and seize their assets. They say I exposed the entire organization to a corporate war and federal scrutiny. They say I am a liability. That is not true, she cried. You were protecting us. You were protecting them from the Carbonis, who were working with Veritin. Truth is irrelevant, Meyer, he snapped. There is only power in perception. They gave me one path, sacrifice. A cold dread, worse than the fire, settled in her. Sacrifice how? I am to turn myself in, take the fall for the lakefront massacre, for the death of Riccardo Carboni, for everything. I am to become the target, draw all the federal heat and rot in a supermax prison. I die, and the council washes its hands. No, she whispered. There has to be another way. There is, he said, his gaze turning to her, intense and dangerous. They said I could be forgiven if I clean house, if I sever the Veritin tie completely, prove my loyalty, and make the problem disappear. But they do not understand. Veritin and the Carbonists were the same. The cancer is intertwined. I cannot just cut it out. I have to burn it down. Elena's mind, the sharp, analytical mind of a nurse, began to race. The data, she whispered. The data I stole. It only proved the medical fraud. That is why they buried it. But Raphael, the real data, the financials, the proof that Veritin was laundering the Carboni money. He stilled. Go on. If we get that, she said, her voice gaining strength, it proves you were right. It proves the Carbonists were the traitors, poisoning the organization by mixing their business with Veritin, murdering children for profit. It would justify your war. It would prove you were not a rogue element. You were the surgeon, cutting out the disease. His gray eyes lit with a cold, lethal fire. He understood. It was not a defense. It was a counterattack. Where is that data, he asked. Veritin Tower, she said. The central server, the financial records, the offshore accounts. It has to be there. It is a fortress, and we cannot get in. I can, Elena said. He stared at her. I was a lead nursing administrator. I helped them design the secure medical records database. I know the architecture. I know the back doors. I cannot hack it from here. But if I can get to a terminal, if I can get to the server room, I can take everything. He looked at her for a long, silent moment. This was suicide. It was also the only move on the board. The rain fell in hard, cold sheets slicking the black glass of the Veritin Tower. At 3 a.m, the building was a silent, dark monolith. Raphael moved through the lobby like a shadow. He disabled the 2 night guards with a brutal, silent efficiency, leaving them bound and unconscious. Elena, her heart hammering so loud she thought it would give them away, followed him to the executive elevator. Her hands were shaking, but her fingers were steady as she keyed in the override codes, her old administrator password still active. The elevator doors opened on floor 33. It was dark. The only light, the hum of the server racks from a glass-walled room at the end of the hall. You have 5 minutes, Raphael said, his pistol drawn, its suppressor a dark cylinder. I only need 2, she replied. She reached the server room door and keyed in the master code. It chirped open. She sat at the main console, plugged in a portable hard drive, and her fingers became a blur across the keyboard. Raphael stood guard at the door, a statue in the darkness. They have firewalls, but I know the protocol, she muttered. The drive's indicator light began to flash, furiously. I am in. It is downloading. All of it. The offshore accounts, the wire transfers to the Carboni shell companies. My God. Raphael, it is all here. A soft beep echoed down the hall, an elevator. Time to go, Raphael said, his voice tense. 10 seconds. Elena pleaded. The light on the drive turned solid green. Got it." She ripped the drive from the port just as the elevator doors at the end of the hall dinged open. 3 tactical guards, Veritan's private army, spilled out, raising their weapons. "Intruder, drop it now." Raphael did not hesitate. He shoved Elena behind him and opened fire. His shots were precise. Double taps that echoed in the confined space. 1 guard fell, a second, the third ducked behind a concrete pillar. "Move!" Raphael yelled, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the emergency stairwell. They burst through the door, the concrete steps echoing their frantic footsteps. They were halfway down the landing when another door below them flew open. A 4th guard, one who must have been patrolling the stairs, raised his pistol. He was aiming at Raphael's exposed back. "Raphael!" Elena screamed. She did not think. She acted. She shoved him, hard, pushing him forward, taking his place. The gun fired. The sound was a deafening, wet crack in the concrete box. Elena cried out, a sharp, choked gasp, and her legs buckled. She did not hit the ground. He caught her. His left arm a steel band around her waist. The guard stared, his eyes wide, before 2 rounds from Raphael's weapon struck him in the chest, and he tumbled backward. Raphael stared at the dark stain spreading across the front of her shirt. "No, no, Elena, no." He scooped her up into his arms. She was terrifyingly light. He kicked open the emergency exit, plunging them out into the alley, into the driving, cold rain. He leaned her against the wall, his hand pressing hard against the wound in her abdomen. "Elena, stay with me," he commanded, his voice cracking, the capo gone, leaving only the terrified man. He was begging. "You cannot sleep. Look at me. Our daughter. Sophie. You cannot sleep." She looked up, her face impossibly pale, the rain washing the soot and blood from her skin. Her eyes struggled to find his. A faint, weak smile touched her lips. Blood at the corner. "I just wanted—" She gasped, her hand coming up, her fingers trembling as she touched his scarred cheek. "I just want to be with you. Forever." "You will be," he said, a terrible, cold resolve hardening his face. He kissed her, a desperate, rain-soaked kiss. He pulled the drive from her pocket. He laid her gently on the ground, pulling his coat off to cover her. He ran to his car, parked in the alley, plugged the drive into a secure laptop. The files began to upload, blasting out to every major news network, every federal agency. He looked back at the tower. He pulled a small, black detonator from his tactical bag. He had planted charges on the main data trunks and power conduits on his way in. "You wanted the Veritan tie severed," he whispered to the storm. "I will serve it." He pressed the button. A low thump, and then the first 10 floors of the Veritan tower erupted in a secondary explosion, a chain reaction of fire and light. Glass and steel rained down. The data was now public. The building itself was a funeral pyre. The world's mafia would be shaken. Veritan Health, exposed and burning, would be dead by morning. Raphael ran back to Elena, lifting her gently into his arms, and vanished into the night, a ghost carrying his only light. Just as the first sirens began to wail. She woke to the sound of a steady, electronic beep. The smell was antiseptic, sterile, and the light was a soft, indirect white. She was not in the alley, she was not in the rain. Elena's eyes snapped open. She was in a private medical room, high-tech and windowless. An IV line snaked cleanly into her arm. The pain in her abdomen was gone, replaced by a dull, heavily medicated ache. "Sophie?" she gasped, trying to sit up, but her muscles screamed in protest. "Right here, Mommy." Elena's head turned. Her daughter was asleep in a large, comfortable recliner next to the bed, safe, clean, and clutching a new teddy bear. Relief washed over her, so potent it made her dizzy, but it was followed by a different, sharper panic. "Raphael." The door opened. It was not him, it was Angelo, his face grim, his suit immaculate. He looked tired, older. "Where is he? Angelo!" Elena demanded, her voice raw. Angelo did not meet her eyes. He stood by the door, a sentinel of bad news. "He's gone. Miss Brooks." Gone, where is he hurt? Did they take him? He saved you, Angelo said, his voice flat, heavy. The surgery was successful. You were very lucky. He brought you to our own doctors. Where is he? She insisted, her voice rising. What? He did what he had to do, Angelo said, finally looking at her. The data you released. It worked. Veritin is in ashes. The federal government is tearing it apart. The council, he paused. They were satisfied. The Carboni stain was removed. Raphael was proven right. He was a hero to them. But he still had to pay the price for the chaos, for the lake house, for the tower. He made a deal. What deal? Elena whispered, but she already knew. A sacrifice, Angelo said. He turned himself in. He took the fall for the Veritin explosion, for the murder of Riccardo Carboni, for everything. He drew all the heat. He's in federal custody. No, she breathed. No, he promised. He did it to make you free, Angelo said, his voice softening. You are no longer a person of interest. You are a whistleblower, a victim. Your name is cleared. He left this for you. He placed a small, black velvet box on the bedside table. He said you would know what it meant, and he said goodbye. Angelo turned and left the room, closing the door softly behind him, leaving her alone with the beep of the monitor and the quiet breathing of her child. Her hand, trembling, reached for the box. She opened it. Inside, on a bed of black satin, was a simple, impeccable diamond. It was not large, but it was perfect, its fire reflecting the sterile lights of the room. Beside it, folded into a tiny square, was a piece of paper. She recognized the strong, angular handwriting. It was not a long letter. It was only one sentence. If there is a next life, I will find you, not in the darkness. Elena closed her hand around the ring, the metal cold, then warm, and she brought it to her chest. She did not sob. She wept, silent, scalding tears for the man who had twice walked into the fire for her, the man who had become a monster to protect the world, and who had sacrificed himself to give her the one thing he could never have, a normal life. She held her daughter's hand, the ring pressed between their palms, and she believed, with an absolute, agonizing certainty, that he was still alive. 18 months later. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. The town was a small, green jewel nestled in the Vermont mountains, a place where the world's problems felt a million miles away. A simple, hand-painted sign hung over the door of a small, white building, Brooks Community Clinic. Elena Brooks, her hair longer, her face clear of the shadows, was running a blood drive. The clinic was hers, funded by a massive, anonymous donation that had appeared in her account just weeks after she left the medical facility. She was no longer Anna Costa. She was herself. She was a healer. Sophie, now 5 years old and chattering constantly, was in the corner of the waiting room, organizing crayons, the official receptionist for the day. The front bell jingled. I will be right with you, Elena called, taping a bandage to a patient's arm. Take your time, a voice said. Elena's hands froze. It was a deep voice, hoarse, a rough rasp that she had not heard in a year, but that she heard every night in her dreams. The voice of Marco from the fire. She turned slowly. A man was standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun. He was not the capo in the suit. He was not the ghost in the tactical gear. He was dressed in worn jeans, heavy work boots, and a simple flannel shirt, his sleeves rolled up, revealing scarred forearms. He stepped inside. His hair was short, his face clean-shaven, but the scar was still there, a faded silver line that traced from his temple to his jaw. He was leaner, perhaps, but he looked healthy. He looked at peace. And his eyes, when they met hers, were the same impossible, piercing, stormy gray. I was told, he said, his voice rough, you were looking for Dr. Brooks. She dropped the roll of medical tape. It bounced onto the linoleum floor, unraveling. She could not breathe. He was here. He was not in prison. He was here. Raphael, she whispered. He did not smile. He just watched her, his gaze drinking her in, a look that held 12 months of agony, regret, and desperate, unyielding hope. She took one step, then another, then she was running. She did not stop, did not slow down. She launched herself across the small room and collided with his chest, his arms strong and solid, wrapped around her, lifting her off the ground, holding her so tightly she thought her ribs might crack. She buried her face in his neck, her hands clutching his shirt, and she inhaled the scent of his soap and sawdust and the unmistakable, unique smell that was just him. He held her, his face buried in her hair, his own body trembling. No words were spoken. There was nothing to say. It was a long, silent embrace, heavy with the memory of fire and blood, heavy with sacrifice, and overflowing with a forgiveness so profound it was painful. "Mommy," a small voice broke the silence. They parted, but did not let go. Elena looked down, her face awash in tears. Raphael kept one arm locked around her waist, anchoring her to him. Sophie stood a few feet away, her head tilted. She looked at the strange man, her eyes tracking from his boots, up to the scar on his face, and finally to his gray eyes. A slow, delighted smile spread across her face. It was the smile of pure, uncomplicated recognition. She ran. She did not run to Elena. She launched herself at Raphael, her tiny arms wrapping around his leg in a fierce hug. "Daddy Rafe," she screamed, her voice bright and victorious. You came back. Mommy said you were the hero, and you would come back." Raphael went rigid, his gaze shot to Elena, his eyes wide with a question, with a shock so deep it stunned him. Elena was just watching, crying and laughing at the same time. He looked down at the small, blonde head pressed against his jeans. Daddy Rafe. He had been called boss. He had been called Mr. Moretti. He had been called a killer. He had been called a hero. He had never, in his entire broken life, been called that. His throat tightened. He slowly, stiffly, crouched down, bringing himself to her level. A sound tore from his chest, a rough, choked sound he did not recognize. It was a laugh, mixed with a sob. He reached out, his large, scarred hand cupping her small face, his thumb wiping a smudge of crayon from her cheek. He looked at Elena, his gray eyes no longer cold, no longer dark, now shining with a light she had only ever dreamed of. He was, for the first time, truly home. One more year passed. The snows of Vermont gave way to a brilliant, clear spring. Life, for the first time, was not about survival. It was about living. Raphael Moretti was no longer Raphael Moretti, capo. He was Rafe Brooks, the man who had served 18 months in a federal prison after a deal was struck in the wake of the Veritan collapse. His testimony against the corporation, combined with the public data Elena had secured, had made him a national hero to some, a complex anti-hero to others. The council, satisfied that he had taken the public fall and cleansed their world, had let him go. He was a civilian. He was free. He found work as the head of security at the local elementary school. It was a quiet job. He walked the halls, his presence a silent, reassuring monolith. The teachers trusted him. The children adored him. They saw the scar on his face and thought he was a retired soldier. He was, in a way, Elena's clinic was the heart of the town. She had planted a sprawling, chaotic garden of wildflowers around their small, rented farmhouse. She ran free health workshops on weekends, teaching CPR and basic nutrition to anyone who walked in. They were a strange, quiet family. They were both scared, both survivors, and they had found a peace in the ordinary. Raphael would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching Sophie learn to ride her bike on the gravel path. His hands, the hands that had taken lives and folded paper airplanes, were now learning to mend broken bicycle chains and tie sneakers. He would watch Elena come out of the house, a smudge of dirt on her cheek from her garden, a basket of vegetables in her arms, and a profound, aching stillness would settle in his chest. This, he had learned, was love. Not the fire of obsession or the pain of loss, but the quiet, steady warmth of a life rebuilt. One morning in early May, they took a drive. It was a long drive, hours south, back into a world they had left behind. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his hand steady on the wheel of a simple, safe family sedan. "We have to," Elena said, her hand resting on his knee. "It is time." The city was Chicago. It was loud, gray, and smelled of exhaust. It had not changed. They parked the car, not a sedan or a pickup, just a normal car. He got out and opened the back door for Sophie, who was now 6, all long legs and bright, curious eyes. They walked down a familiar street, the wind just as cold as he remembered, though it was spring. The neon R in Grill was still flickering. Frankie's Grill. They walked inside, the same smell of stale beer and burnt coffee, the same wobbly tables. Flo, the waitress, was still there, her hair grayer, her feet slower. She did not recognize them. Why would she? They were not a hunted nurse and a starving child. They were not a mafia boss commanding a room. They were just a family. They slid into a booth in the back, the same booth where he had once sat alone. Flo ambled over. "What will it be, folks?" "I will have the spaghetti and meatballs," Raphael said, his voice quiet, the rasp almost gone. Elena smiled. "Coffee for me, and for the little one." She looked at Sophie. "A short stack of pancakes." Sophie beamed. The food arrived. The diner was quiet, only the sound of clinking silverware. Sophie took a huge bite of her pancake, syrup dripping from her chin. She looked across the table at Raphael, who was watching her with a soft, private smile. "Daddy," she said, her voice muffled by the food. "Yes, Mia Cara," he answered. "I remember this place, a long time ago." Elena's hand stilled on her coffee cup. Raphael looked at his daughter, surprised. "I was so hungry," Sophie continued, her voice simple, stating a fact. "And I looked at your plate. Daddy, you had this." She pointed her fork at his spaghetti. "You had the biggest meatballs." Raphael's smile widened, but his eyes, those gray, stormy eyes, were bright. He reached across the table, his scarred hand covering Elena's. He laced their fingers together. He looked at his wife, a lifetime of shared pain and redemption passing between them in a single glance. Then he looked back at his daughter. "And I remember," he said, his voice soft, "when your mom tried to leave quietly." Elena laughed, a wet, sudden sound. She brought their joined hands to her lips, kissing his knuckles. The sunlight, fighting its way through the grimy Chicago windows, struck the simple gold band on her finger, reflecting in the cheap coffee. It was in that moment, as the three of them sat bathed in the dusty, morning light, that Elena noticed someone watching. In the small, two-top table by the door, the one where she had once shivered, sat a young woman. She was hardly more than a girl, perhaps 16, her hair matted, her jacket thin, her eyes hollow and fixed on Sophie's pancakes. Elena's breath caught. It was a perfect echo, a life repeating itself, a different woman, the same hunger. She looked at Raphael. He had not seen the girl. He was just watching Sophie eat. Elena squeezed his hand. She slid out of the booth, her movements no longer frantic or fearful, but steady and sure. She walked to the front of the diner. The young woman flinched, her eyes darting to the door, ready to run. Elena smiled. It was not a smile of pity, but of understanding, a smile that said, "I have been where you are." She stopped at the table, a healer in a place of ghosts. "Sit down, honey," Elena said, her voice warm, pulling out the chair opposite the girl. "It is cold out there. Let us get you something hot to eat." Thank you so much for listening to our story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please comment below and share your thoughts with us. To hear more stories like this, please subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Story. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, and you can support us even further by hitting the hype button to help this story be heard by more people.